The Philadelphia Flyers were a massive surprise in 2023-24, overcoming all preseason expectations to make a late push for the playoffs that ended on the very last day of the season. Currently, though, they're a team in transition between the old guard and the next generation, with that new talent beginning to infuse the lineup. The question is whether the stage is set for the Flyers to take that next step into the playoffs this year, or if they're still a year or two away.
I admit it. Last year was rough.
The 2023-24 season started for the Flyers kind of how everybody expected. They were extremely inconsistent. But by Thanksgiving, they were 3 games over 500 thanks to a recent 5-game winning streak, surprising a lot of people in the NHL. They then followed that up with a massive set where they won 7 out of 8 games in December, firmly announcing to the rest of the NHL that they were a team to be taken seriously. But then just as they were flying high, the revelations came out that Carter Hart was accused of sexual misconduct from his time as part of the Canadian junior hockey team. It didn't matter that it was years ago. In light of these accusations, Carter Hart had to take a leave of absence from the Flyers on January 23rd and has not been with the team since. At that point, the Flyers were 8 games over 500 and trending upward, but for the rest of the season, they just stalled out, posting a losing record without their number 1 goaltender, their season ultimately being undone by an 8-game losing streak in the final month of the season. Even though they had an outside shot to make the playoffs on the final day of the season, they couldn't hold off the Capitals, being eliminated from the playoffs before their final horn even sounded, and making sure that Kleenex would never go out of business in the state of Michigan, while giving Red Wings fans the biggest complex this side of a Donald Trump rally. A lot of the improvement that the Flyers showed last season can be attributed to their new coach, John Tortorella. Though Torts has a reputation for wearing out his welcome quite quickly, those first few years in the honeymoon phase can be very, very effective. He's already getting along with the Philadelphia media and endearing himself to their next potential franchise player, Matvei Michkov. There's nothing really I can say about Torts that hasn't already been said. The guy's a massive lightning rod, he rides his players hard, he has his favorites, and he has the ones that fall out of favor with him very quickly. The question's just going to be who is going to be who for this Flyers team. Torts is definitely a Philly guy, but it's only going to take one downswing and one bad press conference for them to turn on him. If nothing else, it's great television for the rest of us watching how this whole thing is going to go up in flames, because it eventually will.
You're a star, you're on top, somebody bring you some hair.
You should kill yourself.
Honestly, the Flyers don't really have a star player. You could make an argument for one of Konechny or Couturier. Maybe Matvei Michkov will prove himself to be that guy at the end of this year, but for right now, he's an unproven rookie. So for now, I'm going to say it's Travis Konechny, as he led the team in both goals and points last year. And even though he's a very solid player who can play both power play and PK minutes, which is very valuable, the Flyers do desperately need somebody to emerge as a legit, consistent scoring threat on their team.
Oh, this guy again.
Even though Konechny probably could flip onto the second line, right now I would assume he gets the top spot over Michkov, alongside Couturier and Tyson Foster. On Couturier's side, he has been with the Flyers for over a decade now, but in recent years he has been battling some injuries. While he was healthy for the most part last year, he only put up 11 goals and 38 points in 74 games, so there is the mileage may have finally caught up to him. On the other side of him, though, is 23-year-old Tyson Forrester, who is entering his second full season of NHL action. His rookie year was fine, 20 goals and 33 points in 77 games, nothing to sneeze at, but I wouldn't expect him to be a fixture in this top 6 3 years down the line, unless the rebuild goes horribly bad. On the second line, we have the biggest question mark of the entire season for the Flyers, Matvei Michkov. He's finally come across the pond from the KHL earlier than most people expected, and with massive expectations. A lot of people are actually expecting that he's going to be in contention for the Calder Trophy against Macklin Celebrini, and he's considered to be one of the best Russian prospects since guys like Malkin and Ovechkin came into the NHL. He also might be more toxic than Yasu Amin, and he and Tortorella will end up getting into a fist fight behind the bench. It's one or the other. It's going to be very exciting to find out which. His centerman to start off his rookie year is Morgan Frost, who is more of a two-way player than a setup man, so he might be Michkov's first victim if he doesn't pass him the puck enough. His other wing, though, Owen Tippett, that's a guy who can actually help him score points, as long as he doesn't hog all the goals for himself. The Flyers' third line is actually one of my favorites in the NHL, starting with Joel Farabee, who just posted his first 50-point campaign at age 23 and might be one of the most underrated ascending players for the Flyers. Bobby Brink, the other wing, is a little more unproven, only 67 games in his NHL career, but I love his energy and I think he has some offensive potential that's yet to be unlocked. In between them, though, is Scott Lawton, Flyers Vance Catnip, who is more challenged at offense than I am challenged at being able to pronounce names correctly. Fourth line, similarly, is a pretty banger group, and that's not just talking about how much they hit, if you know what I mean. Noah Cates, Ryan Poling, Garnett Hathaway, all a bunch of big bodies, all a bunch of guys who are not going to produce much offensively, but they'll throw their weight around and play the shutdown minutes pretty reliably. And while you can make the case that the Flyers forwards are like sneaky good, I don't think that's the case for their back end. Cam York and Travis Sanheim as your top pairing is just gross. I mean, Sanheim is fine. He's just a second pairing guy playing first pairing minutes, while Cam York is currently just an absolute dumpster fire out there. He is young, he's only 24 this season, and he did take a pretty decent jump last year at his first full NHL season, but on most any other team that fancies themselves a playoff contender, he is maybe a second pairing guy and probably starting off in the third. Behind them on the second pairing, Nick Seeler is still here because Danny Briere doesn't understand the concept of selling high. The guy's having a career year at age 30, and instead of trading him at the deadline, you extend him for 4 years? Yeah, paying a guy for his outlier campaign has never gone wrong in the past, Danny. He is getting paired with Jamie Drysdale, a promising young prospect who is the fruits of the return after Cutter Gauthier told the entire city to go fuck themselves. It was funny, we all had a good laugh, but Jamie Drysdale is just turning 22, so his poor play so far in his NHL career can be written off for that reason. But again, on most competent organizations that were trying to develop him correctly, he'd have the luxury of being able to play third pairing minutes or even spend some time in the AHL before getting thrust into the fire. Behind them on the third pairing is Igor Zamula, who's actually been kind of sneaky impressive in his limited NHL appearances. With the right tutelage, he could develop into a really good two-way defenseman, and oh, that's right, you have to anchor him to the corpse of Rasmus Ristolainen. I can't believe somebody willingly traded for and extended this piece of garbage. If your GM is getting suckered by the Buffalo Sabres of all teams, he deserved to get fired. Don't worry though, Flyers fans, he's only on your team for another 2 years after this. Finally, we get to the goal, which is the Flyers' biggest weakness in my opinion. Samuel Ersson and Ivan Fedotov are going to try and backstop the team in the absence of Carter Hart, but unfortunately last year they were both, how do I say this kindly, trash. Ersson put up an .890 save percentage and a negative goal saved above expected on the year, while was actually somehow worse in his 3-game appearances, an .811 save percentage and the second worst goal saved above expected of any goalie in the NHL last year. Ersson, at least, is younger at age 25, but Flyers fans pray he does not get hurt, because if Fedotov is playing a significant amount of games for you next year, you are going to get run out of the building.
Britta's in this?
Flyers cap situation is honestly just so foobar, they weren't able to bring in any big free agents last year. They did jettison Ryan Johansson's contract, as Danny Briere started to go head-to-head with his old teammate Chris Drury in a Who's a Bigger Scumbag GM contest. The biggest addition in the offseason is honestly going to be Michkov, but they also had a top 15 pick in the draft, and unlike Michkov last year, I think they kind of reached on Jet Luchenko at 13. He'll be a fine player in my opinion, but he was probably going to go closer to 20 by most mocks. All in all though, in this transition year, it's not really surprising that Flyers didn't make a lot of big moves.
That's not bad.
I already kind of teed it up when I talked about him earlier, but Bobby Brink is a really interesting young player to me. Even though his stats don't jump off the board, and I'm a big stats guy as most of you know, the energy that he plays with and the skill that he has out there is really, really unique. He's a shifty player with a really good shot who showed some flashes of top 6 potential last year. If he continues to develop, he and Michkov could make a deadly 1-2 punch on the right side.
The Gambletron 2000 says the winner is Cincinnati by 200 points. Why, you worthless hunk of junk?
There's definitely a scenario where things continue to go really well between the players and John Tortorella. The young players continue to come up while the veterans get another gear. And if all of that happens, I still think that the Flyers are not going to make the playoffs. That's best case scenario in my opinion. Worst case scenario is that Tortorella's implosion comes sooner than expected, Matvei Michkov gets pissed and fucks off back to Russia, while Ersson and Fedotov both let in 6 goals a game. Even though that's not likely, Flyers fans, be honest with me, when I said all that, you thought, there's a chance that could happen.
Last year, I thought the Flyers had finally restored themselves as a respectable NHL team. Aside from their crazy cup run, where they let Chicago win their first cup since 1961, the Flyers have really never been good since 2004. Last year started so well, I finally had some positive things to say about them. And then Carter Hart happened.
Losing to a TJ Oshie goalie, tied with 3 minutes left in the period to be eliminated from the playoffs. Yikes.
Their fans think they're relevant, but really they're just one of those random bubble teams.
It's Philly. Does it need any more explanation?